Come to us. It's Women's Day. It's Women's Month. I trust that you have an absolutely beautiful one. What I can tell you, some of the biggest heroes here in South Africa are women. And Palesa is about to have a conversation with one of them, one of my personal heroes. So I'm going to say goodbye to you so that we can have enough time with our former public protector, Thuli Madonsela. God bless you. See you tomorrow. Have a beautiful Women's Day. Palesa, over to you.
All right, welcome back as we are about to wrap up our conversation and discussions that we've had since 6 o'clock here this morning at Constitution Hill. Now, joining me now is our former public protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. She celebrates her Women's Day here at Constitution Hill by hosting an intergenerational democracy dialogue that's going to be between veteran leaders, the youth of 1976, and today's young female leaders. But in fact, she started in the early hours of this morning from last night because they had a sleepover at this place. But she's here. She will tell us a little bit more about the sleepover. Advocate, good morning to you and thank you so much for coming through and happy Women's Day.
Good morning, Palesa. Good morning to the viewers and happy Women's Day. Thank you for this privilege.
Thank you so much indeed for talking to us here on the show. Let's start with the sleepover yesterday. When we got here, a whole lot of you were, packing and going back in your pajamas, and it looked quite amazing.
It was an amazing experience. It was a diverse group of women in terms of race, age, and geographic origin. And we were here, of course, to raise money for homeless people and to provide some things that were given to people as gifts to homeless people. But in the end, it was also an opportunity to network, to sit around the fire. Women of various ages and diverse colors sit around the fire discussing how do we take this country forward, but not in an ugly way about who's doing what wrongly. It was more about how do we roll up our sleeves and take the country forward, particularly economically.
So you all agreed that something has to be done drastically so and urgently so?
Absolutely. Our main concern was around social justice, gross inequality and extreme poverty, and also anticipating that more people may be laid off in various industries, not only because of the economic doing badly, but also because of digitalization or automation. And we were looking at what can be done to make sure that the people who are displaced find their place in our economy somewhere else.
All right. No, it sounds interesting. But just before we talk about the dialogue that you're hosting today, obviously it's difficult to ignore what happened in Parliament yesterday. Your take on that as an ordinary South African citizen?
That's a question I was hoping you won't ask, Palesa. But now that you've asked it, I would say as a citizen, we saw democracy in action. Our constitution provides ways and means through which we elect those among ourselves that we consider to be the most trustworthy, to be the most selfless, and to be the most competent to look after our affairs. And those people yesterday deliberated and voted on what they think is the best thing for South Africa. It's up to South Africans to decide whether they agree with them or not.
All right, let me not dwell more onto that issue and talk a little bit about the dialogue that you're hosting today. What's the focus of that dialogue, Advocate?
It's a democracy dialogue on democracy, freedom and social justice. It's about women coming together to consider what can women do to continue the project of healing the divisions of the past in our country. The 1956 women who we are celebrating today came together across color, across race, across ethnicity and geographic spread, and decided that they could play a role in bringing about a better South Africa, a more inclusive South Africa. Yes, it was about passes, but it was more than that. It was about ending injustice, ending exclusion, and bringing about a South Africa where democracy works for everyone. So today it is going to be the women that were there in 1976, such as Balisa that we've seen just now. Hopefully a few that were there in 1956, but even if they were not at the march, but those who are at the age of 1956, and then the X generation, which is the 80s, those who are 35 to 50, and then the millennials who are 18 to 35. So we have 4 generations coming together, 1956, 76, X generation and millennials, sharing views, defining democracy our own way, finding a link between democracy and freedom, and finding a link between social justice and democracy. Ultimately, coming up with ideas on how can we move the needle forward with regard to improving social justice, particularly in relation to extreme inequality, extreme poverty, and racial as well as gender polarization in our country.
Yeah, well, indeed, interesting. It sounds quite interesting. I mean, the fact that we're looking at the intergenerational people coming together under one roof, it sounds interesting. But now, Advocate, let's move to one worrying factor that we have seen unfolding in South Africa, femicide. We've seen young women being killed, allegedly so, by their partners. What do you think needs to be done? We spoke to an organization called People Opposing Women Abuse, and are basically saying that the law is not doing enough.
Femicide is one of the greatest threats to women's freedom today, and part of the reason we're coming together today is to talk about things like that, the extent to which femicide is taking away freedom, and also it is an expression of social injustice. What can be done? You're saying the law must do something. Yes, the law must do something, but the law is not enough, Balisa. The reason people kill their wives, kill their girlfriends, and beat women in bars and places like that is not necessarily because there is no law. It's because there's a pathology in our nation. There is a sickness in our nation, and we need to heal those divisions in our nation. People who feel alienated, people who feel they don't belong for whatever reason, people who feel inadequate for whatever reason, we need to find ways to make them feel they belong, to make them feel adequate, so that they don't take it out on women.
In terms of protecting them, who should take responsibility of protecting them? You've just made a mention of a recent incident which happened where the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Thuli Madonsela, is allegedly to have assaulted a woman. So who should take responsibility to protect women?
Well, the first people who have to take responsibility to protect women are those who harm women. It really starts with the abuser. We can blame women, we can blame society. The abuser, they should take responsibility for their own anger, their own insecurities, and find a way to affirm themselves, because no happy person kills other people or harms other people. We harm other people when we're unhappy, when we're insecure, when we're afraid of whatever it is that we're afraid of. So they're the first people. But the second people is society as a whole. We need to be rolling up our sleeves to protect the women, but secondly, to reach out to men. One of the things we discussed yesterday, particularly with the minister in the women's ministry, was that a lot of our interventions around equality target women. Even interventions around gender justice, including gender-based violence, are targeted at women. But the people who harm women are not women, they are men. We need to reach out to men, but more importantly, we also need to reach out in a manner that makes men understand that when women rise, it doesn't mean they have to fall. And when women progress, it doesn't mean that men have to regress. In fact, we can all move forward as society. So we need to reassure men that we all have a place in society. Women rising is about society rising, and it's about our whole country and the whole world moving forward in a manner that is inclusive and that doesn't exclude men.
All right. There's so much to talk about. I wanted to touch on the issue of transformation, more so looking at how far women have progressed in the workplace. But we've run out of time. Advocate Thuli Madonsela, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm sincerely honored. If there are any people who would like to make their way to Constitution Hill, they must join us for the Democracy Dialogue. It's going to be fun, but it's also going to be historic because we want to come up with a Marshall Plan on social justice. Thank you.
Now, let's leave it at that. Thank you so much. Advocate Thuli Madonsela is a former public protector here in South Africa, talking to us about the intergenerational democracy dialogue. As she said, it's between veteran leaders, between the youth of 1976 and between the young female leaders that we have currently in South Africa. And that wraps up our broadcast live from Constitution